What does a museum want to be in the 21st century? For us, it was very important to understand a museum not just as an institution that collects, but also that is, an institution that is open, that is accessible to all, that provides the community, the various communities that we address, artists, residents of New York City, international tourists, people from elsewhere in the United States, with a place to have a conversation about issues that are important in our present world and in our contemporary society. I think we very much believe the museum should be a citizen and should provide a platform for these communications, which have become more and more rare in a way because of loss of public space and opportunities to have these conversations among people. And so I think a museum space can and should be that. So many more things than just showing art, but really giving the opportunity to use art as a conversation starter for the key questions of our present. And so in that sense, even though I don't know the situation at the Lemke House, what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, that you need a building that is able to provide a space for these civic conversations where the public can meet and reflect on our here and now and what this all means and where we want to go together. The Mies, research was part of a larger research project that I published under the title Montage and the Metropolis, and it looks at sort of new practices of visual representation of architecture and spaces that the invention of photography basically made possible. And Mies is a particularly fascinating case because we see Mies as this master architect who, basically through his long and productive oeuvre came to a deep investment with sort of the ontology of what architecture is, the reduction of architecture to the very essence of construction. I think there's also another story to be told with Mies, somebody who was deeply engaged with artistic development, who was very aware, for example, of the Dada circles, who mixed with the Dada circles in Berlin when he first moved there after World War I, and who understood that what was happening in art was a visual revolution that changed very much the way we look at our environments. And of course, it was also this visual revolution was also a direct response to what had happened with the emergence of the metropolis, with the acceleration of movement and of the fractured gaze that a modern metropolis with all its many levels of visual engagement offers to us and creates almost a visual crisis. And so I think Mies was interested in exploring what would that mean for architecture. And so I think I would make the argument that his interest in Dada montages and the application of the photographic image was used as a tool to conceive of a new perception and conception of space in his work. And he used photomontages to represent that thinking, I think. Very appropriately, these are some of the drawings that present the design. The Mies archives came to the museum in the late 60s. It was actually Mies's explicit wish that the artistic side of his work would be stored and preserved at MoMA. For obvious reasons, there was a long history of Mies with this institution. He had a large exhibition here in the late 1940s, and of course was featured again and again. So he almost was kind of like one of the heroes of this department in particular, through personal connections, but also, of course, through his seminally important contribution to the evolution of modern architecture. I would say that the acquisition of the Mies van der Rohe archive was a transformative moment for this department. The museum doesn't generally collect archives, so this was really an exceptional case and remains an outlier to the present day. We do not have, in general, comprehensive archives of architects in our collection, with the exception of Mies van der Rohe and, since a few years, Frank Lloyd Wright. That is a huge asset, but it's also a huge responsibility, because it means that we have to not only make sure that Mies's legacy is preserved materially, that all the drawings that we inherited, if you want to say, are basically preserved in museum conditions into perpetuity, but also that we make the archive accessible for scholars, for students who are interested in learning about Mies and doing research on his work. So what we have here is a very small selection of the literally thousands of drawings that we have in the collection from Mies van der Rohe, and very appropriately, these are some of the drawings that present the design evolution of for the Lemke House, which is Mies's last built project in Germany before he emigrated to the United States. And it's always stunning, of course, to see original drawings. They're so delicate on this tracing paper. They're so delicately designed. You really see Mies's idea of, the less is more also in play in how he draws. He just, for example, here he arrives at just doing a massing, very effective understanding of the massing of this building with just, 2 or 3 lines, and that's it. And of course, it's always great to have actually, the master himself drawing, so you get a sense of his design thinking. Here, for example, what is super interesting, we have here an elevation of an early iteration of the project, where you see that the Lemke House was originally conceived in this kind of pavilion idea with 2 stories, sort of a very elegant construction with these grid of columns, with basically an open ground floor with a sitting area, and then above the living quarters on the 2nd floor, which of course was then heavily revised, and the Lemke House ended up being a 1-story building, which adhered more to the courtyard typology that Mies became very, very interested in throughout the 1930s. So in a way, these drawings that we have here allow us to also understand sort of the larger questions that Mies was grappling with in his architectural thinking in the early and mid-1930s. We also have some, larger sketches, so they're also on tracing paper, and they are very meticulous. Here we have a specific design, for door handles, or for how to fold the metal in railings. There's a lot of calculations. So you have this understanding, what architecture also is. It's not just about sort of the grand gesture of creating spaces. It's also going down to the very meticulous detail of, what material are you going to use? How are you going to prepare it so it's going to look good in the building, and how much of it do you need, and how much is it going to cost, which is of course always an interesting conversation with the client, which I think it was also here with the Lemke House. There's very rarely a moment when there is not a single piece of Mies on view in one of our galleries. It does happen. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. But that's again a wonderful asset, because in many ways, you can almost use Mies to present any kind of facet of modern architecture in general, because his oeuvre is so rich and the archive is so expansive that it allows us a myriad of stories to be told.